Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael DeGeorge, and I'm here to post another video on this very snowy, cold day, December 10th, 2025. And usually, when I start off, I talk about the daily devotional book that Pastor Bob Cadola gave me recently, and I read a chapter or a verse from that chapter. Today, I'm not going to do that because this video I'm about to post is going to be by far the longest one I've posted. So I just want to tell you in advance. And I just want to get right started with it. And some of the things I'm going to talk about in this video, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. Not everything's going to be pleasant. So I just want to tell you in advance. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is another book, the Holy Bible. The greatest book ever made, without question. It's the most thoughtful, it's the most accurate, it's the most joyful, but it's also the most brutally honest book I've ever read. And the amazing thing is that I've only read about 2% of it. So that's how good the book is. But for a long time in my life, I was very indifferent about the Bible. And that's because of the actions of one gentleman. And I'm going to explain. Because one of the things I've been reading about is about Job. And Job, his life was not easy. Chapters about him are very dark, a lot of suffering. His wife was a piece of work. Satan was doing Satan things to him. But there's one thing that I always go back to. And that's this one comment right before chapter 7 starts. And it says, Job excuses his desire for death. And he complains to God. And like I've said in the past, I never knew God until September. So I never complained to him because I never knew him. But there was one gentleman who did complain about him 18 years ago. That because of his actions, I was indifferent about the Bible. And you say, what does that have to do with John Cena? Well, I'm going to share. Because the first time I met John Cena in person was August 14, 2004. It was a hot summer day in Toronto, Canada. And as you see, I'm wearing my John Cena shirt today. There was two wrestlers that were signing autographs, doing meet and greets from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock that day. One of them was John Cena, and I was happy to see him, and so were the thousands in the line. But that was not the wrestler that everybody was wanting to see. The wrestler they were wanting to see was the wrestler that was with him, and his name was Chris Benoit. See, Chris Benoit was from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, so he was in his home country that day. And I could tell you in 2004, outside of Wayne Gretzky and maybe Mario Lemieux, he was probably the most popular Canadian athlete there was at that point. I still say to this day, Chris Benoit, bell to bell, is the greatest professional wrestler I've ever seen in my life. He's not the greatest all-around wrestler. To me, that's Ric Flair. He's not the most famous. That's The Rock. He's not the biggest moneymaker. That was Hulk Hogan. And he's not my favorite wrestler. That's John. But in the ring, Benoit can do anything. He's the reason why I watched Japanese pro wrestling. That's because I wanted to see the Pegasus Kids matches in the early 90s. That's when he went by when he was in Japan. He's the reason why I watched Lucha Libre wrestling in Mexico, because he went by the Pegasus Kid there too. He could do anything. He could wrestle any style against any opponent. He was so good that one time he wrestled Kurt Angle, who was an Olympic gold medalist in heavyweight freestyle wrestling in 1996 in Atlanta, Georgia. That means he was the realest of the real. He was the best wrestler in the world at that time. And he did it with a broken neck, Kurt did. So when Kurt got into pro wrestling, he wrestled Chris Benoit in WrestleMania 17 in 2001 in Houston, Texas. And for the first 7 minutes of that match, all they did was do amateur wrestling. And if you would have saw that match and you would have told somebody that somebody was an Olympic gold medalist and the other one was just a pro wrestler, I'm telling you, most people would have thought Benoit was the Olympic gold medalist. That's how good Chris was in the ring. And WrestleMania 20 in 2004 was his shining night. I was there live with my mom and dad. He won the main event that night for his first and only world championship. He defeated Triple H and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat match. And as I shared in yesterday's video, that night John Cena won his first singles championship, defeating the Big Show for the United States title in the opening match of that show. For a long time, I thought that was the greatest wrestling show I ever been to. But it only lasted 3 years. And that's because the end of the show, Chris's best friend in the wrestling business, Eddie Guerrero, came in the ring. They hugged, they embraced, and there wasn't a dry eye in Madison Square Garden. And then his wife, Nancy, and his son, Daniel, came into the ring. His son was 4 at that point. And his wife, Nancy, was as beautiful as ever. They hugged and they embraced, and there wasn't a dry eye in Madison Square Garden. And the great thing about that was that the wrestling fans knew who Nancy was, because Nancy Toffolini was in the wrestling business long before Chris was. You see, Nancy Toffolini got her start in the wrestling business when she was 20 years old. In 1984, she married a wrestler named Kevin Sullivan. And Kevin Sullivan wrestled in championship wrestling for Florida from 1984 to 1988, with Nancy by his side as his manager, or as they call it in wrestling when a woman escorts a man to the ring, a valet. And she didn't go by Nancy Toffolini. She went by one name, Woman. That's what she called herself. And the first time I ever saw her on television was in 1989 when both Kevin and Woman got signed by World Championship Wrestling. And the first time that Jim Ross interviewed Nancy, I thought she was the most beautiful girl I ever seen in my life. And that was the first day that I truly had a crush on another woman on television. She was special. She truly was. A lot of guys today, they may have crushes on Taylor Swift or Selena Gomez. But for 11-year-old Mike DeGeorge, I had crushes on 2 girls, Nancy Toffolini, Woman, and Miss Elizabeth, Randy Savage's wife. And I had the honor and privilege to see them both in person in 1996 in Buffalo, New York. WCW ran a house show there at the arena that the Buffalo Sabres play in now. It was called the Marine Midland Arena then. I don't know what it's called now. So anyway, that main event that night was Randy Savage versus Ric Flair. And Ric Flair had both of those women by his side in his corner. And they were interfering regularly throughout the match. They slapped Randy Savage several times. But I brought a sign that day. And I said I wanted to see Woman and Miss Elizabeth, because I didn't know if they were going to be there. But as I just told you, they were. And I was in the 3rd row. And when Nancy and Miss Elizabeth turned around and saw that sign, they both blew a kiss to me. I was so happy that day. I was euphoric. That was heaven for me that day. So going back to WrestleMania 20, when Benoit won that match and they were in the ring, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And when I saw John for the first time, I shook his hand, patted him on the shoulder, I took a picture, and I said, good luck tomorrow night against Booker T. And then I went up to Chris, and I gave him a big hug. And I said, I've been waiting 15 years to meet you. And then I love you. And he said he loved me back. And he took a picture with me. Then I took a picture with both of them. The next night at SummerSlam, Benoit was in the main event, and he lost his world title to Randy Orton that night. It was the last time he was ever going to be world champion, and it was the last time he was ever on a main event in a WWE pay-per-view. Chris always resented that. And he also resented that the following year, his best friend Eddie Guerrero passed away. You see, in November 2005, Eddie Guerrero in a Minneapolis, Minnesota hotel passed away of a heart attack. Eddie had a lot of demons, and unfortunately, he couldn't overcome all those demons, and he passed away in November 2005. I missed him. Wrestling fans all around the world still miss him to this day. And Chris never truly was the same after that. And the reason why I'm saying is because June 24, 2007 happened. June 24, 2007, Chris Benoit was supposed to wrestle CM Punk on a WWE pay-per-view that night. But he didn't show up. And nobody knew why. There was no storyline reason. He wasn't injured. Just wasn't there. And I remember going to bed that night. And I got up the morning early because I had to take a shower and get ready to go to work at Wegmans. And I just happened to check my computer because I just wanted to know what happened with Chris. And then the unthinkable happened. Chris Benoit was dead. And not only was Chris dead, but so was his wife, Nancy, and his then 7-year-old son, Daniel. I was devastated, but I was also very confused. I didn't understand it. It's like, how can 3 people be dead in the same house? There was no burglary, no gunshot wounds, nothing. And I remember my dad taking me to work that day on Brooks Avenue. And he said, son, something's not right. We're going to find out more, and it's probably not going to be good. And I remember going to work that day, and I didn't talk to very many people. The 2 people I talked to the most was Greg Lochner and Mark Cassidy, up in the Walk Picks 5 and 6. Greg, just like me, is a big wrestling fan. He still texts me all the time about wrestling. He'll text me, I guarantee you, Saturday about John's last match. And Greg kind of felt just like my dad did, that something's wrong, and we're going to hear more about this. And Mark didn't care about wrestling at all, but he was a good enough man to give me a hug and tell me that it's going to be all right. I miss Mark dearly. He was a great man. So suffice to say, my dad and Greg Lochner were both right. Because the next day, I found out that Nancy and Daniel were killed by Chris. You see, he killed them both, then went downstairs in his basement and killed himself. But not before he wrote a letter. And he talked about how, just like in chapter 7 of Job, he excused what he just did. And he complained to God for what happened to his best friend, Eddie Guerrero, and what happened with his wrestling career not being the same as it was in 2004. And he placed this Bible book right next to Nancy and Daniel's bodies. I was heartbroken. And to say I was mad would be the understatement of the century. I was obviously mad at Chris. I was mad at wrestling. I was also mad at myself because I went back to August 14, 2004. And I remember that was the first time I met John Cena. And all I did was to shake his hand, pat him on the shoulder. And I told Chris Benoit that I loved him. That's why I was indifferent to the Bible for a long time. But I understand now. We live in a fallen world. And people do bad things. People sin all the time. But I was pretty much done with wrestling at that point. I told my dad, I'm not going to watch wrestling anymore. Just can't do it. And then Friday night that week came. John Cena was a guest on Larry King Live on CNN. And I said, I'm going to watch it. I want to see what he's going to be PR spin. He was going to do damage control for the company. And he was going to throw Chris under the bus. And then that was going to be my last time I ever seen John Cena on television. But he did the opposite. He showed compassion. He showed humility. He showed grace. He chose love. He said that Chris was a good man who did an awful thing, and that he was going to pray for his dad, Michael, and the entire Benoit family. And that he forgave Chris. That day, John Cena was a good Christian. And I don't know if he actually is a Christian. He keeps his religious beliefs pretty close to the vest. But all of his shirts say never give up. All of his shirts always say hustle, loyalty, respect. I think John Cena is a Christian. There's no doubt in my mind he is. And from that day forward, John Cena became my favorite wrestler of all time. He saved the business that day. Ticket sales went down for several months after Benoit's tragedy. And if it wasn't for that interview, they would have never got back up again. So I watched wrestling for the next several years just to support John. And one thing is guaranteed, there will never be a wrestler I like more than John Cena. And it's not because of all the world titles. It's not because of all the WrestleMania main events. And it's not even because of all the Make-A-Wishes he's done to help so many sick kids, even though that's part of it as well. It's because of that interview on Larry King Live. He saved wrestling for me. And I think for every wrestler who's going to be in that locker room on Saturday night, they all owe John a debt of gratitude, because a lot of them are making more money than wrestlers have ever made before. And it's all because of John. So Saturday night's going to be a very, very special night. It's not just going to be a scripted wrestling match. It's going to be very, very special. And I can't wait for it. And as for Nancy and Daniel, I know you've been with God for the last 18 plus years. God's taken good care of you both. And one day, I'll be up there in heaven with you, and I'll get to meet you both again. And as for Nancy's sister, Sandra Toffolini, she's been going through a lot of health problems recently. About 8 days ago, a GoFundMe page was set up in her honor because she's been in the hospital for several weeks now, and her insurance couldn't cover all of her medical bills. Two angels helped her out in her time of need. One of them was another Chris Jericho, another famous Canadian wrestler. And the other one was, of course, John Cena. They both donated so much money to her that all of her medical bills got covered. And now she's out of the hospital, and she's on the road to recover. John's a good Christian. He practices what he preaches. And to Chris Benoit, just like my brother Joseph Amico, I forgive you. You made me mad that day, and I was mad for a long time. But I forgive you. Bell to bell, the best wrestler I've ever seen. And Saturday night, I'm going to watch Saturday night's main event and watch John Cena's final match. But that morning, I'm going to watch a couple old Chris Benoit matches because he was just that good. And my next video, part 3, I want to talk about how John Cena's 2025 in so many ways mirrored my life this year. And why John Cena's last match being the night before I get baptized, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's God's work. So I went long, but I had to tell the story the proper way. So like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want, because I love people, I love animals, and I love John Cena. Because life is good, God is good. God bless you all, and thank you for listening.